Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc Isseks.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing very well. Yourself, Mark?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm excited. We have our second guest ever here on State of Ed podcast, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Barry Isseks to our podcast. Welcome, Barry.
Welcome. Thank you very much for the welcome. Good to be here.
Now, anyone who is listening to this podcast right now and is very shrewd will recognize that we both have the same last name. And that is because I think we are second cousins once removed through marriage, if I'm not mistaken.
I think we're first cousins, actually.
Oh, actually, Barry's my uncle, and and he's a very recently retired technology coordinator for the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And I thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity here to talk about technology from someone who's literally been on the front lines, not only just in software, but in infrastructure as well. So we very much welcome you to the podcast and appreciate all the insights that you'll share with us this afternoon.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
So my first question was, who's your favorite nephew?
A guy named Marc.
Perfect. This podcast is going just as I predicted. So can you tell us a little bit about your district and where it's located out in California?
Sure. So in the San Francisco area, we are about 20 miles east of the city of San Francisco. The towns that the district covers are Walnut Creek, Danville, San Ramon. So 30 schools make up the district. A combination of elementary, middle, and 5 high schools, and 2 alternative high schools.
And approximately how many students do you service in that district?
The last count, I think, were 35,000, I believe.
Oh, wow.
So as the technology coordinator, what are your responsibilities to those 35,000 students and all the school buildings and all of the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of staff members?
Yeah, good question. We have to provide connectivity, internet connectivity, throughout all those schools. So obviously there's a large wide area network that we're maintaining. And that's on the technical side of it, of course. And then we have teachers and technology mentors that are out there working with teachers to bring the technology into the classrooms. So that effort sometimes, is problematic with making everything work physically. And then, of course, getting the teachers on board using the technology in the classroom is really another entire issue.
So as tech coordinator, I have to just ask, how have you seen this role change? I mean, how many years have you been tech coordinator?
This is be 20. It was 23 years. Yeah, 23
So,
years when I entered the district.
okay. And what was your role before being tech coordinator?
I was a teacher of science.
So in those 23 years, how have you seen in your district the role of the tech coordinator change? Like, how dramatic has that shift been?
Right. So at the beginning, technology was kind of very much a secondary concept. There was really very little in the way of connectivity back in 1990. There just wasn't the infrastructure. It didn't exist. You probably remember back then. The internet was just really fledgling in 1990. Between 1990 and 2000, infrastructure became the operative word. So, we had Parent Day where parents would actually come in and help run cables around the schools.
Oh, wow.
It was, Apple Talk. It was Starlands. It was, just trying to get the feel of how computers can actually do things in the classroom. It was, you have to think back to when there were really no cell phones and when technology was just in its infancy. And that was what it was like. And, in 1990. If you look back, things have changed tremendously since then.
So
Yeah.
what was the goal, to have like one CPU in a classroom back then?
I remember putting together one of the first district technology plans, and back in those days, and we're talking about, again, about 1992 or three, the first plan was to have, I think, every teacher to have a computer. It wasn't a matter of technology connectivity at that time. It was a matter of just being able to run some applications that were disk-based on local machines in the classroom, and that was about as far as it went for that first plan.
Like word processing, essentially?
Yeah, basically, to use Microsoft. I mean, I don't even remember if Word was available then. Probably more applications where you had to do command control characters to put parentheses around things and underline them. Yeah, Word Perfect, stuff like that. So it was really it was a challenge to introduce teachers to that at that time. It was like, what do we need that for?
I've been teaching. I'll be in my 22nd year, so our career as U.S. Tech coordinator and my time as teachers kind of overlap. And I just think of how when we started, just for example, we would get these gigantic scan sheets to fill in our grades, and we had to submit them. And then it went to, oh, you could actually put your grades on a computer. And now, of course, you can do your grades on a mobile device. So I just think of how this time that you've been in that role, how drastically, how quick the technology has expanded.
Yeah, I think we lose track of what it was like back then. We kind of judge everything now by the way things are now, but we forget so quickly how rudimentary things were. I mean, there was no you couldn't send video. Of course, that was ridiculous. Sending video in 1995 was like, that's just not possible. Files had to be very small, or they would, we were still using modems for most things. 56K baud modems. It took hours to send a file, a 1 megabyte file. So those things amazingly changed, and really behind the scenes. Nobody saw them physically change, and all of a sudden it was there.
So a couple of questions. You're located not too far from the heart of, the technology capital of maybe the country, maybe the world, arguably. And so I would imagine that things would move a little bit faster in your neck of the woods than they would even out here, or certainly maybe in other areas across the country. So when this started to change and all these things started to happen, what were those first years like when you were trying to sort through and figure out which step to take forward? Because there's so many different possible avenues in which to go.
Sure. So the big thing was email. Getting everybody to have an email account, and then being able to use email to communicate with teachers. That was the first big thing that I remember here in the Valley. So, whether or not teachers understood the internet, the concept wasn't really firm in people's minds, and the infrastructure wasn't there for it anyway. But email was easier to do. You could do it on a school by school basis with local applications, and that's pretty much where things started. And then, of course, the connectivity came later, and that connectivity came in the form of T1 connections, which was probably one of the first ones before the cloud was around. Point-to-point T1s between schools, and it's kind of the rudimentary way that the connectivity started. But email
So were
was
those physical lines that had to be run from school to school in the communities
correct.
in order to connect them? And so can you just take us through what was that like on the infrastructure level? I mean, was there just Is it the kind of thing that they were able to go in through the pre-existing cable lines that were already run underground, or did they have to start running things overground or underground in order to make that happen?
Yeah, this was before fiber, so they would use a twisted pair, a twisted pair of telephone wires,
Hmm.
and basically run, multiplex or mux over that pair, a T1 line, uh, basically creating a data line. It was actually a four wire data line, and that went to our district office, and then from the district office there were individual T1 connections that went out to each school, and each school got its own T1, and not all of them had it initially. First, they started with the high schools, and then they kind of spread it out to the middle schools. The elementaries were the last ones to get connected.
So now that I guess a certain, I don't even know if it's irony or just an appropriateness, and there's no way that you could have possibly had known at the time. I mean, you earlier in your career prior to teaching, you were actually involved in a telephone company doing installations and things like that, and there was no way that at the time that you could possibly have known that those skills would have come back into play, years later when you were trying to connect communities through in a school district to a T1 line and get them on and connecting with one another. It's kind of fascinating.
Well, I was in a kind of a unique situation also because I was a certificated teacher and not a tech. But when I got into the district, we had a big need for both technical knowledge as well as the educational knowledge to implement that in the classroom. So I kind of wore multiple hats. We didn't really have a tech group that understood the technology in the classroom. Unfortunately, that persists until today, where you've got two factions. You've got the tech faction, who are really, who grow up with making sure everything's locked down and nobody can have access to anything. And then the teachers, or the educational side of things, which needs access to information. Those two are at cross purposes. Unfortunately, continue to be at cross purposes today.
You're the tech expert, so I'm curious what your thoughts are. But I feel like we're going to look back and say that everything happened so quickly, and nobody really could have anticipated how rapid the changes in technology were going to happen. So, like you said in the beginning, the goal was let's just get a computer in every classroom. And everybody was excited. I remember even when you had maybe like 2 or 3 computers in the back of a classroom for kids to share. Then smart boards came about and people got all excited. Let's have a smart board in every classroom. And the goal was to just meet a quota, but we didn't really utilize the technology to the best that we could. And now with a budget crisis, we're looking back and people are saying, well, maybe we wasted some of this money spending on things that haven't really been utilized. So now there's almost like a backlash against technology.
Mm.
That's just my thought, and I'm upset about it because I think technology, what we're living through is so phenomenal. We could be doing so much more with it in our schools.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a legacy of that initially when I remember the first Microsoft computers came out, and the first desktops, personal computer, as it were, and schools went crazy and bought hundreds of them, put them into labs, or even just put them into the schools, and they never got used. And I remember vividly schools that would have these just sitting and not being utilized because no one either knew how or wanted to spend the time or had tech time devoted to it. It was all still the 3 R's, and we can't do that on computers anyway. So they just sat there. And I think that created a lot of anguish among people who bought it. So yeah, that was early on.
And think about just the changing nature of school administration. If people are moving from one district to another, and now you come in and you inherit whatever technology, whether it's a 3-year contract, a 5-year contract, and then budgets year by year. I just feel like we're going to look back on this time as a lost opportunity for what we could have done, creating educational systems that are truly 21st century learning environments.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. The thing that really boggles my mind is how administrators come and go
Right.
in such a wholesale way. We'll have a director of technology for 2 or 3 years. They'll come in with very focused ideas on how technology should be implemented. And then when they leave, another one comes in with a
Right.
totally different idea of how these things should be done. And so everything turns on a dime and starts to move in a different direction. Case in point, we had a superintendent who came in who was very, very gung-ho Apple. And at the time we were...
I like him already. Tell me more
no,
about
he was a
him.
great guy. I happen to like him very much too for some reason.
Sounds like a genius.
He's a brilliant man. Anyway, he said, "Okay, we're going to buy iPads for everybody. Every child in the district's going to have an iPad."
That's 35,000 approximately
35,000
iPads.
iPads. That's correct. And there was immediate backlash from schools that were PC-based schools, because we had about 50-50. Probably by the end of my tenure, there were about 50% of the schools that were PC and 50% of the schools that were purely Mac-based. And the tech people were all PC-based people. They didn't want to hear about Macs. They thought they were toys. They couldn't lock them down. They were very, very unhappy with that. And when that superintendent said, "We're going to have Macs and iPads," they all freaked out. So we had a tremendous amount of discord. It was crazy. Well, he was there for, I want to say, 5 years. And when he left, a new superintendent came in that had really no love for Apple, and brought in a director that had no love for apples, and everything started to change. So, you can't do that. You can't, especially in platforms, you just can't say, "Okay, we're just going to go a different way now," and expect people to follow along. It was very divisive, and really was a problem.
Isn't that true of really any kind of educational principle? You really have to pick something and stick with it for a while just to get all of the benefits out of it. And it could always change over time, but if you're going to kind of hop in and out of concepts, platforms, ideas, math programs, reading programs, you're just not going to get the continuity that you need to have whatever it is bear the kind of fruit that you're looking for it to produce.
Yeah, but isn't that the case in education in general? I mean, you've got, the open classroom where they knock down the walls and everybody's in one big room separated by curtains. And then you go back to, no, we've got to be more compartmentalized and put the walls back in and rebuild the schools in that way. And then the pendulum swings the other way. And, it's the same thing. It just goes on and on like that as concepts change in education, and you get people who feel one way about it and others that feel another way, and they're going to affect how that school functions over the period of their tenure. So, I think that just is part of education.
Is the
Right.
pendulum swinging faster now, do you think, than it was perhaps earlier in your career?
Well, the technology has, there's been a giant wave of technology that's washed over everything, a tsunami of technology. And that has, it's created some good things and it's created some insane things. And it's really divided how people feel about education in the classroom setting. That whole concept is all changing as we speak. Seat time is no longer education per se. Education now is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week thing that, in a lot of people's opinion, mine included, is not relegated to 5 hours sitting in a seat in the classroom. And you're seeing that obviously in the college, at the college level now, with all these online classes. But I think you're going to start seeing it in the high schools, and even, I don't know, maybe even down to the middle schools.
Yeah, I just wanted to
And
go back for 1 second, comparing educational philosophy to the technology. The difference between the two is that if you come in as a new administrator and you have different ideas on how to run a classroom, it doesn't really cost that much money. You can have innovative ideas that are free, that are just good leadership ideas. And I love the idea of experimenting with new ways to run a classroom. But when you come in with a whole new idea of the technology to be used, it just costs a lot of money. And I think that's sometimes the struggle that they are confronted with. Because you want to change, you're a PC school, and you want to change everything to Apple. Well, that's a lot of money. And now the taxpayers are wondering, right, Mark? I mean, how,
mhm.
how are we going to change? We just spent all this money on everything else.
Hmm. Yeah, and I recall our superintendent who said, you will buy MacBook carts,
Right.
and we want rolling machines. We don't want machines in a lab. We want cows, computers on wheels. I don't know if you call them cows
No, I never heard that
back
one.
there. We call them cows, computers on wheels.
We're from New York. We don't know what cows are.
Yeah, so cows, computers on wheels, and these are basically big boxes that roll with computers in them that stay charging most of the time until the students are using them. So roll them in the classroom, hand them out. When they're done, put them back in the box, and that's how you implement technology. At least that's the way it was until the BYOD phenomenon. You
Right.
all know about BYOD. So now the district is trying to determine how we're going to provide access for devices that are brought in by students that are of whatever ilk, and make sure that they have connectivity for those in a in a Wi-Fi environment that's safe and protected.
Right. But modernization has helped. I mean, the more recent modernization of technology has helped sort of simplify, programming and coding. There's more of a lingua franca now than there was before. You used to have to literally have different, programs couldn't talk to one another if they were written in different codes, and now, for the most part, you can open up most things in most other types of applications. So there's a lot more flexibility now, which allows for greater connectivity. So you can have a BYOD type of system in place, whereas you couldn't have done that 10 or 15 years ago because they literally wouldn't be able to talk to one another. But now a MacBook can talk to a ThinkPad, can talk to name another tablet or a device. By and large, they can connect to one another.
This is true. However, when you think of the security environment that you're in a school district, you have to also determine how those students are going to be connected and still be accountable.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So if you're on a wide area network or you're on a local area network, you're on a wireless of a school, and you're using that wireless, and you threaten the president with an email that points towards that wireless environment, that's going to be a problem. And if it's on someone's cellular network, that's a different story. But if you're logged into a wireless environment, then how do you hold that student accountable for what they do when they're on your nickel, when they're getting their internet through your connectivity? So you've got to provide the safety of a safe internet where they can access the dirty internet, and yet know that they have logged in and logged out. Now that takes a tremendous amount of infrastructure software to do that, and we are doing that in our school district. But that means that every student has an account. They log in through a portal. That portal controls what applications they can access, and it also notes where they are, who they are, and that they have logged in at and logged out at different times during the day. That's not simple stuff, but you're right, it is possible to do, but it's no longer just like going in and being part of a guest network.
Well, let me ask you, in an ideal setting where a school is fully connected with teachers utilizing whatever device it is, do you prefer the computers on wheels? Do you prefer the bring your own device? Or do you prefer giving every kid a laptop or, or an iPad or a Google Chromebook?
Well, what I prefer doesn't matter. Everybody's got a cell phone now, down to the fifth grader, right? You go into an elementary school, and there's fourth and fifth graders walking around with iPhones. I mean, they've all got their own portable mobile device, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone or a Samsung. They've all got their mobile device. And if it starts in fifth grade, you can imagine everyone in the middle school's got one, everyone in the high school's got one. So they're going to be using their own device on their own cellular networks for most of the things they're going to be doing. I don't know how many today are actually utilizing logins to the district wireless. But I know that in order to work with teachers to get to work with applications that are being provided for them by the district, they need to log into these portals to do that. And I think that's a good thing. So I don't think they need to be assigned a laptop. I think most people have a portable device, but I love iPads personally. I mean, I think it's a great device. And I think the superintendent's idea of providing one for every student was an excellent, excellent idea. It wound up getting shot down after he left, but a lot of schools do have one-to-one iPads now in our school district. So I'd say probably 15 or 20 of those 35 schools actually have one-to-one iPads in their district, in their classrooms.
So you've mentioned a lot about the infrastructure side, which I could ask you 1,000 more questions because I find it endlessly fascinating. But let's transition to the other part of this. You were one of the individuals or the individual who wrote the technology plan. And I'm assuming that part of that plan, of course, involved infrastructure, but the other part of the plan had to include how to push this down and teach the teachers how to best utilize this new technology and get it into the classrooms so it can pay dividends. So can you take us through the challenges that you faced and that perhaps are still being faced today as we continue to transition into more and more digitally integrated schools?
Yeah, very, very good question. The earlier years, there were really there was no group that dealt with teachers to kind of filter this knowledge down into the classroom. It didn't exist. We had a couple of mentor teachers, and that's kind of how I got started moving into the technology field. And that is, I would meet with teachers once a week. We'd have meetings at various schools, and we had a technology group. And that technology group consisted of interested teachers at schools that were starting to do some implementation of technology. And, not all schools did that early on. But we had a core of maybe 7 or 8 or 9 teachers, one from each school. And we would meet at a site, whether it was a middle school or an elementary school. Somebody would bring cookies, and and then we would discuss the app of the week. We'd talk about, Reader Rabbit or one of those fun apps that they could introduce to the school and to the classroom so the kids could, there was a great wagon train one. What was it called? Oh gosh. I can't remember the name of it, about a wagon train going out into the West, and the perils that they ran into, getting scalped here and there,
Hmm.
and having to kill buffalo to eat along the way and stuff like that. So those kind of apps were great, and the teachers loved them. They brought them into the school, and kids were using them on the few machines that they'd have in each classroom, or in the lab, because we did have some labs, mobile labs, back in the earlier Mac lab days and PC lab days too. So that was kind of how it got started. Today, or at least before I retired last year, we had an entire group, technology group, assigned to schools to actually go in on a 2 or 3 day basis, because there would be one maybe for two schools, and meet with teachers and kind of show them the latest and greatest and answer questions and hopefully get them more into the technology implementation. So that has gotten better, but you still, there was no way to really make the teachers come to the technology. You give them a computer, but there was no way to make them use it. And that, other than taking attendance, there was really no other, demand on the teachers to use the computer in the classroom, and so many didn't. Of course, many have been there for so long. You start teaching without a computer, and it's always easiest to go back to what you know.
I think that game was the Oregon Trail. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. It was Oregon Trail. Thank you for that. I just slipped right out of my mind.
When I hear you talking about, getting teachers just to utilize the technology or the software for attendance, it brings back so many funny stories that, of teachers that were so, I mean, so difficult to get them to utilize technology. But I have to ask a question in terms of just the software. How do you feel about online grades where parents have access, you utilize programs where parents have access to all of the kids' grades, like a running total throughout the year? I know that there are some programs that will even give parents the kids' class rank as early
Right.
as the first semester, ninth grade.
Yeah. Um, in high school, parents are very nervous in high school. I don't know if you guys have that same
I don't know what you're
trepidation.
talking about.
Yeah, right. But they need to know on a daily basis, how is my child doing? Are they going to get into Stanford, or where are they in the grades? And I think it's a good thing for them to be seeing a running status of how the student is doing, rather than to be surprised at a quarter, or whatever the marking period end is, to find that they're behind the curve, or not doing very well. That's more of a shock to the parent, and the reaction, of course, is, how come I didn't know this?
But isn't there a happy medium where we can have ample notification without it being real-time notification? Because real-time notification from where I sit as the administrator in the building is just so problematic. For starters, you do have the technophobes who still exist, who are very much still thinking they're going to blow up the school or the world if they push the wrong button on the computer, and they don't utilize those electronic grade books and so on as regularly or as readily as you would hope. So that's problem number one, because those phone calls would come directly to my office, where with parents demanding to know where that information is, because teacher A has it but teacher B doesn't.
Hmm.
And that puts teacher B at a disadvantage if he or she is not really as comfortable with the technology. And then of course the other side of it is, you might have some people who are really doing a wonderful bang up job and on top of everything in terms of grading, and you might have another teacher who's very much five stacks behind, and they're not providing the same amount of feedback in the same time fashion, and that also would create lots of problems. So from my standpoint, while I certainly see the advantages and would love in a perfect world to be able to offer that, I just feel like it's so problematic and creates a tremendous amount of headaches on the administrative side of it and the maybe the logistical side of it as well.
Right. Well, I think the school, and obviously every school has its own applications for doing it. That is, whether they're using an LMS, a learning management system, or they're using a attendance program that has those kinds of features built in, and the newer ones do, of course. Sometimes it's required, and I know in our district, the new learning management system that we were using requires the teachers to put those in as the tests are graded, and it's all online. So it's become kind of a standard thing, so that everybody has to follow that same protocol, rather than some teachers doing it, some teachers not doing it for whatever reason.
Right, but there are standards in society. They're called the laws, and people don't follow them every day. So what happens? My question is not, what happens if you provide a standard or you have an expectation, because of course you should be able to, and that's wonderful. What happens when that standard or that expectation is not met?
Well, from the teacher perspective, I'll say that if we had this type of program, it would probably encourage me to grade things in a more timely fashion. That's number one. And number two, as more, just like think about getting a website for a teacher. In the beginning, did every teacher have a website? No. But as
And
more
and in the end, every teacher won't have a website.
I agree, but would you say more people have websites today than 5 years ago?
Sure.
Yes.
So it's the same concept. As more people acclimate themselves to these changes, I think more people come along. I mean, the
Well,
beginning,
that was my point originally, is that can we find that middle ground where we can have some more feedback and some more access without having real time, the expectation of real time access? Because we live in a society with helicopter parenting, which I don't believe existed 2 3 generations ago. I know it didn't. So now you would have a parent who would be sitting at a meeting at work on his or her cell phone checking the LMS to see how the child is doing at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, when they go for lunch, on the way home on the train, and you're going to have to deal with that. I think that that would be problematic. I love the concept, and I love opening up, pulling back the curtain a little bit and giving people more access to that information. But my fear is if you give too much, and the expectation is that they have basically this literally a running record in real time. I think you're going to wind up frustrating a lot of people because you just won't be able to provide the level of service that they're going to demand.
see, and I like it from the perspective that there's no surprises anymore. There's no, well, why did my child fail? Why did my child not get a 90? It's all there for you.
Hmm.
Now the onus is on the student and the parent. If there's a certain level that they want to meet grade wise, it's all there for them.
Yeah, but you're going under the assumption that the quote unquote reasonable parent is going to look at this real time information, say the teacher has done all the teacher can do. It's now all on me and my child, and that is not going to happen. So you will provide all of this, and the next question will be, why didn't you do whatever the next thing is that they're demanding? And then you're going to go ballistic because you're going to say, I have graded faster than I've ever graded. I have updated everything in real time. You have access to everything. How much more do you want from me? And that's where the stalemate's going to happen.
Well, if they're not happy with the grade, the stalemate that you're describing is either going to happen during the marking period or at the end of the marking period. So that's not going to go away. It's not that it's not there. So
No,
I'd
but it's going to create with real time grades is going to create real time headaches and real time problems.
I would much rather, if you have those problems, wouldn't you much rather have them before the marking period is over? When the time is really up?
I agree. That's what I'm saying. There should be that middle ground where you shouldn't. I certainly don't believe that anyone should be surprised at the end of a marking period that a child has failed. There should have been interventions all along the way, and that I believe is absolutely appropriate and should be absolutely necessary. But my argument is against the real time nature of it. Barry, we don't usually fight like this. I
So
apologize.
Oh, I
no,
love
that's
this.
you can squabble. It's good. It's
All right, well,
it's
we'll
healthy.
continue that fight another day. When you brought up learning management system, though, can I ask you, are you which ones you're familiar with, and if you have any preferences on, Schoology or Edmodo or Blackboard?
Right. So we did an in-depth search for a learning management system, and it was a 2 year process actually to find an LMS that everybody liked, and unfortunately nobody liked any of them.
You had me on the edge of my seat. I was so excited to hear what the answer was.
Yeah,
He was about to run to central office.
there was always something that was wrong with one of them. We actually implemented Moodle for some classes that we implemented, some online classes, because Moodle makes a wonderful tool for building online classes.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, in fact, we used Moodle because Moodle's open source, so you can actually buy Moodle. It's open source and basically build your own classes in it, and we did that. And we had the Moodle running on our own servers, so it was running on internal servers, and it worked very, very well. It's just that there was, nothing was canned, so you had to build everything.
See, I went to a conference, must have been 10 years ago at a high school in New Jersey that was so far ahead of everybody technologically. And the whole idea of the conference was just creating a, tech-friendly school environment. And that's when I learned about Schoology at the time. And I just kind of put it in my bag for a couple of years. And then
Right.
I guess one day I finally got around to cleaning out that conference bag and looked at it, and I became overwhelmed, very impressed with the whole concept. So I've been using them ever since, but I've tried to find, what might be the best program. So I've tried a different one each year. That's why I was just kind of curious if the tech expert for the show had one that he thought was best.
Yeah, so I can't point to a single
okay.
one that was certainly best, but we did get our feet wet in this. It just didn't catch on as well as I thought it would.
Okay.
Um,
Well, what were
and-
the expectations? What were you hoping it would accomplish?
Well, we hoped it would bring everybody together into a learning environment that they could all log into, and it would have all the tools in it that you could hope to need for basically a good learning experience for everybody. And it just didn't.
I think the way you have to implement the learning management system with the teachers is it has to be, I think, part by part. You can't just overwhelm them with everything that it can do. So I know in our school this year we had a 7th grade teaming program where the English, math, science, and social studies teachers all work together with the same students. And I helped get them set up with Schoology, and they just used the component of the
The
homework.
inbox? Mm-hmm.
No, just the homework. Just
Mhm.
because what happens is if each teacher posts the homework on this site, then kids can just log in and on one calendar where
Mhm.
it's color coded, he or she can see all of his assignments, and the other teachers can see what the team is assigning as well as far as
Right.
tests, quizzes.
Right.
And
Plus,
have-
it pushes right to the cellular device too.
Right.
Yeah,
And it
and the
really
and the testing is in there too, so
right.
you can actually have the testing as integrated in the LMS.
And it worked. I mean, and these were teachers, none of them who had used it before. And now at the end of the year, they were coming up to me saying, could you help me set up my other classes next year for this? I want all of my classes to be on the system. I think that's how you unroll things. That's how you get teachers to buy in. Instead of overwhelming them with every facet of the program, which then they just get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, because I remember rolling this out, and it was class after class after class, and you had to learn how to use it. It wasn't totally intuitive.
Well, since we're talking about all this time in front of the screen, there was an interesting article that was in the New York Times that I shared with both Barry and Nick, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And it was about disconnecting and how difficult it is for adults to disconnect. So, of course, if we're having difficulty disconnecting, then how are the digital natives doing? So, I want to get your thoughts, both of your thoughts on this article. Like when it comes to screen time, when is enough enough?
Hold on, Mark. I got to put my cell phone on charge because I'm running out of juice.
Yeah, it's a new world. Every day seems to be a new world. But kids, adults as well, are now glued to their mobile device. And why are they glued to mobile devices? Obviously, because either they're looking at who's posting pictures on their Facebook page, who's responding to emails, who's querying, who's offering great deals on sushi. What's the cheapest rental car? But it's all information that we never had access to at the level that we do today. So is it surprising to see everybody kind of stuck to their mobile device because of the information that it provides? I don't think it is. I think it's normal because people by their nature are curious animals. That's how we got to where we are in this level of technology to begin with. So I don't think what we're seeing is abnormal. Does it cause problems mentally? Does it create an instability that we never had before because we were able to sit and read a book for 2 hours or 3 hours? I'm not sure I agree with the premise that we become scattered, beyond the ability to sit down and read a book because we have the distraction of the cell phone or the mobile device. I think I don't quite buy it.
Is it possible, though, just to play devil's advocate, because he does make the argument that he feels his brain, quote unquote, is a perpetual motion machine. Is it possible that, none of us are digital natives? This technology was introduced to us along the way. So prior to it being introduced, we developed other abilities, the ability to sit and read, the ability to have an attention span, the ability to do all these things. And I can only speak for myself. I know that has been transformed in some way. I don't have the same. I flip through things more quickly. I try to just kind of scan things because there's so much I want to get to because I am curious, like you mentioned. So part of it is just because I want to get to the next thing, but I still can sit and read a book because I have a sense memory. I do have the ability to do that because I did it at one point and I can recall that time. But as we get further and further along the timeline and more and more digital natives come online, they will never have had that opportunity. Does it damage them or does it impair their ability to be able to do those types of things? Will they be able to replicate that kind of attention span 30, 40, 50 years from now? And does it matter? I guess maybe is another question, but I just don't feel that they will be able to.
Well, the case has been made that the digital native's brain is physically different than the non-digital native's brain. Been a bunch of books written about that. If it is indeed wired differently, then I think the answer is to your question is yeah, it is changed, and they will never be quite the same as the non-digital native. if the brain is indeed rewired in light of the technology as it exists today. I'm not convinced. I'm maybe just old school, so I'm not convinced that that's the
The
case.
technology coordinator is old school. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, yeah. And yet I've been through the whole. This whole thing has been, I've seen this all happen. So, and I think I am probably as quick with the technology today at 70 as a lot of the teachers out there today are, in their 40s, 30s, and 40s, and certainly have. I don't think I've lost a lot in my ability to understand the technology. So I don't know how to answer from the viewpoint of someone who is, quote, a digital native brain, because that's not my brain. But I've seen young people read a book. I've seen them be very, very into reading a book. Children of, I don't have any grandkids yet, but I see other grandkids, 6, 7, 8-year-olds that are, picking up books and reading them. They also know how to use the App Store, but they
Especially making in-app purchases.
making in-app purchases. They know how to say, "Dad, what's the code for
The Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi?" But they can also read a book, and they also, I've seen them actually physically sit down and read a book. So I haven't watched them read the whole thing, but I know they read through it. They look at the pictures, and so I think it's more about the people who are gone through the transition from being book readers to being scattered because of all the technology pulls on them. I think it's those people who are making those kind of comments that we read about.
I was just having this discussion last week with my niece, who is she's I guess 30, and her concern. So she's pretty much mostly the tech, generation, and she really laments the fact that she feels very stressed out by it. She's much more interested in gardening and quiet time and hiking and camping, and she feels as if there's always this pressure. So while you're talking about the idea of reading a book, to me, I look at it as, listen, you can read a book on the iPad or you can read a hardcover book. I don't care how
Right.
you read it. I look at what has technology done, what's the benefits and what's the drawbacks. And I feel as if there's so much pressure on people today. When we were pre this technology age, we watched TV when the show was on. If you weren't
Right.
home, maybe you were lucky enough to figure out the VCR, which a lot of people struggled with, but you just kind of watched what was on. Now people feel the pressure to watch every TV show. When you read a newspaper, you read what was delivered to you. Now you feel the pressure. I got to check out the Washington Post. I have to check out all, because I can get it all online. So I
Right.
feel as if it puts a lot more of like a time constraint. Now the young people, they don't know anything different. So there's, while I would tell them that if I had a choice, as much as I love all of the advantages that technology brings us, I would rather live in a pre-digital age. I just think for my own sanity, it would be a healthier, happier life.
I'll take it one step. I'm sorry, you were going to
No,
say
no,
something?
but they don't know any different. Mark, your kids will not know what it was like to live without a cell phone. They just won't.
Right. But you talked about the pressure. I think that's a perfect way to phrase it. And this really connects to this article about the difficulties disconnecting. When you are 10, 12, 14, 16 years old, living today, and you are on Instagram or you are on whatever, Snapchat, Facebook, the pressure to respond to a post is, socially speaking, enormous. If someone posts something and you don't like it within a certain amount of time, and it's usually like seconds,
Right.
then that could start a fight or a disagreement that could end a friendship. That's the sensitivity that exists. So you have to, the peer pressure now comes into play. You have to be connected, and you have to put that FaceTime in while you're having a meal, while you're in class, while you're in the bathroom, while you're wherever. Because if, God forbid, your friend posts that great picture or needs to know how he or she looks in this outfit, and you didn't like it, or you didn't double tap it, or whatever they do, then that becomes problematic socially for you. So in addition to wanting, that there's the wonderful intrinsic side of us, I want to read the post, and I want to read this, and I want to read that, and I want to consume information. But there's the other side for the younger people, and maybe for some of the adults as well, who feel like they need to post every time they use the bathroom. That you have to have an online life and an online persona, and then respond to everybody else's online lives, and that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on people as well.
Well, I don't think there is no middle ground on this. Sometimes people will talk about maybe you should disconnect for the weekend. That serves no purpose, because once you come back from giving up your cell phone for the weekend, it's just catch up time. Now you're just looking on Facebook for a few hours longer than you would have been spread out over the course of the weekend. So I don't see, it's either you accept and try to cope with the digital age, or you commiserate with other people.
On a podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know young people are definitely, I mean, they have always been under pressure from peer groups. Isn't that the case? I mean,
Of course.
before the digital age, it was, meeting on the street corner and going to the local hangout, or cruising down the boulevard, or, walking with friends to a movie, or whatever the lifestyle environment was then. It's now gone, into the ether. But
back then, there was always the possibility that mom came out to that corner and grabbed you by the ear and dragged you back in if you were doing something that she didn't like. But the likelihood today that mom or dad goes in and grabs that cell phone out of your hand and turns it off or puts it away is, I feel, a lot slimmer now than it ever has been.
I don't know. Maybe they should be doing that.
Well, but I think it's more difficult. Think about this, when kids, before the cell phone, if you called up your friend, or you called up your boyfriend or girlfriend, and you didn't answer the phone, you could clearly just tell them later on, I wasn't home. Now you can't do that. Now,
Right.
Kids, if you didn't pick up the phone or respond to a text, that becomes a fight. That becomes an argument, because you should be able to access them instantly.
You can run, but you can't hide.
I feel bad for kids today. I think they have it much more difficult.
Yeah.
Well, let's transition into the methods lab section of the podcast, and it does, since we have Barry here, I wanted to have it relate to technology. So he had mentioned a little bit earlier in the podcast about the concept of this distance learning or online learning, and how it's finding its way into many college classrooms, and he's predicting now that it's going to make its way more and more into high schools and middle schools, and even maybe into elementary schools. So let's go back to San Ramon Valley for a second. To what extent was online or distance learning available in your district?
We did roll it out 2.5 years ago, and we had a fairly good growth attendance on it for the first year, before I think the funding kind of ran out on it, and the district wasn't excited about renewing it. But we had a lot of teachers who were very interested in it, primarily because it was able to allow students to get their grades, to take tests, to get their assignments, and do all the things that we've already talked about through this distance learning tool. And they didn't have to be, they could be anywhere in the world. They could be on a trip or whatever and still be able to do their assignments. And that was the primary reason for implementing it in the first place. And I think it was successful to the point that we got the following to to happen. And we did get a fairly good following, like I say. It was just that second year that we had a transition of people, and their ideas were, maybe we shouldn't be putting a lot more money into this. When I said, I think I've had it, I'm retiring. So it was kind of petering out then. But it brought to the table the kinds of things that a school information system, an SIS, brings to administration. It brought that to the classroom, and I think it was valuable for that.
But in terms of, I guess, how I envision online or distance learning, I'm sort of thinking about that college classroom where the lecturer is standing at the lectern and there are 30,000 people tuned in via some type of device, watching that lecture. And so they're gaining the benefits of the educational experience, but they're not in the room per se. What other types of distance learning or online learning really is there, or is it all sort of a derivative of that?
Well, conceptually, whether you're using it inside of an LMS or you're doing it using applications, iPad application that's that's outside of that. The flipped classroom concept seems to have really caught on to those teachers that were really out there on the edge. And even those even closer in, there was a lot of peer-to-peer teachers communication on how to use the flipped classroom, Learn Everything, or some of those applications where the teacher could record the lesson and then they could do the homework in class, that kind of flipped idea. And that was that became very popular in the last couple of years that I was involved in the technology piece.
But is distance learning or online learning going to transform schools in a positive way, do you think, in the future, or do you think in a detrimental way?
Oh, do I get to answer that?
Of course.
No. Do you want to go first?
No, you go.
Barry?
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
it should be positive, but unfortunately, I think the trend right now, Mark, is negative because I see too much of using online or distance learning just to get kids to take classes that they've already failed, and let's put them in front of a program where they can get credit for a course. When you talk about it, I know what you're envisioning. You're
Right.
envisioning this powerful teacher, this Thomas Friedman-like figure, and why only let 30 kids benefit from him?
Right.
Why
Right.
can't more? And that as a component to education should be utilized. I always say to kids all the time, one of my ideal school settings would involve having kids go into a large auditorium once or twice a week for I don't want to call it lecture, but you know what I mean, for the information from a master teacher. But then the rest of the week is them working on projects where they're actually developing their critical thinking skills, where they're, hands-on learning.
Well, that's a flipped classroom. Just instead of going home at night, it's 2 days of the
Right.
flipped part and 3 days of the more creative, hands-on, more essential
Right.
learning.
Yeah, but so I think, I don't think you can ever, when you talk about 20,000 kids in one teacher's class, I don't think that can ever be the substitute for what we're doing today.
Okay, so I taught science for a lot of years, and I taught science laboratory. In my opinion, there is no substitute for a kid's hands on a science lab. There's no other way. You're not going to sit in front of a computer and be able to develop process skills. Learning processes is science, and unless you're out there actually weighing things and measuring things and estimating things and all the other process skills that you need in science, you're not going to, maybe you can learn better observation skills online, but you're not going to be able to work with objects physically anywhere else but in an environment where you're at a table with tools, basically.
You need a real three-dimensional space.
With a real three-dimensional space, doing the kinds of things that scientists do to basically understand the real world. And whether it's on a field trip to do that, or whether it's in the classroom to do that, with materials, magnifiers, microscopes, how to use a microscope, you're not going to be able to do that, unless you're actually there physically.
That reminds me of that great line from Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams tells Matt Damon, you could read a sonnet, but it doesn't mean that you're going to know what it's like to be in love. You could. So it's sort of similar.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. But that's not to say that in the science lab we didn't use technology. We used whiteboards, and we used video, and we used tools that electron based, that is CD based microscopes, where we could display a picture on a screen of an object that some kid had under his microscope, and we could all look at it on the big screen. Those things enhanced science labs, and are very valuable for that. But there's no substitute for being in a science lab, chem lab, whatever, actually doing those physical things. You got to be there to do it. So although technology rules the day, you still have areas that are going to require schools to have kids come to.
All right. Well, I think that was really well said, and I have to thank you very much for a really enlightening conversation, and I definitely feel like I've learned a lot, and we covered many, many really great topics and thought-provoking topics, things that very much matter in what's going on in our classrooms in our school districts right now across the country. So I really can't thank you enough, Barry, for giving us some of your time and sharing a wealth of your experience with us. And I know Nick and I were excited at the premise of having you on, and you certainly have delivered in spades. So thank you very much for doing that.
Well, and I echo all those sentiments. So thank you very, very much.
Well, that's great, Mark and Nick. Nice to meet you guys online, and hopefully we'll get to do this again. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
That sounds great. So just to finish up our podcast, if you'd like to follow us, you can do that on Twitter at SOE Podcast. We're also online, and that is stateofedpodcast.com. If you have a question or you'd like to suggest a topic, it's ask@stateofedpodcast.com. We're also available on in the iTunes store under the podcast section. So please subscribe to us so more people can find us that way. And we'll put some of the links to the things that we discussed in the show on our show notes on our website. And other than that, I thank Barry very much for being a wonderful guest. And Nick, thank you as always for a great conversation. And I will see you next time.
Take care.
All right. Take it
Have a
easy,
good
guys.
one.
Bye-bye.